Right. Yeah, I should have said Happy Wednesday. That
Yeah,
sounds more convincing.
that would sound much more happy.
Yeah.
I just pinged Kai to see if he was on his way. And I guess I will ask Andre the same question. I don't know if he's out today. So let's wait.
Were you all waiting for me?
Yeah.
Sorry for that. I was totally distracted writing words.
Perfect. Waiting
Hello,
for Andre.
everyone.
I'll take it.
What? Sorry?
I said I'll take it that we were waiting for you because I'm pretty sure you beat me by like a few seconds.
That's fine. Right.
All right. I think the only one. So the only one I've got on the board is. This is like in the context of snippets and thinking about single file editor. One of the things that Marcel and I were working on was single file editor discovery design. And I think this was sort of a request for Paul or from Paul. So I'm glad that Paul is on. I guess what Marcel and I talked yesterday. I think there's notes below. I can go and find the recording and also toss it up to you. But it was mostly. Paul's ask was like, what is kind of like the components of like the single file editor, like when we think about building components, right? Like that you would want to reuse or that you would want as like things. I think that was sort of the ask, but I guess I'm trying to clarify what was the ask. And then what are you expecting to come out of this? Because in reality, like if you look at the ACE editor and you look at Monaco, unless you're like, right click and view source, you can't really tell the difference between like the numbered lines on the left and the things you can type on the right between the two. So like, what is the expectation coming out of this in terms of what you'd like to see or what would be beneficial? I think it's probably a question for engineering.
Yeah, I heard you mention my name, so I'm responding now, and now I'm talking about responding. What would be awesome for me is seeing where in all the places we do code editing, what's some reusability opportunities and what is the refactoring effort of like, so here we're doing like a discovery and design and like, what are the use cases for if I'm doing editing in the web IDE or in the single file editor, in the ACE editor, or in snippets, kind of basically what you're saying. From the engineering perspective, yeah, I'm interested in reusing the components that we have, and to have the consistent UX is interesting, but mainly highlighting what are those reusability opportunities.
Thoughts, Marcel?
I would add, sorry. I would add some thoughts. I think it'd be interesting to, while you're doing this discovery stage, if the proposal could be cemented on the basis of what we have right now, like if Marcel, when you're doing the visuals of the mockups, if you think about grabbing the one we have right now on the web ID, like full page, shrink it, and then, all right, hiding some things, tweaking some things, changing some colors. So starting with what we have right now, sort of like moving things away and re-enabling it in the style of that would make our lives easier, because then the rewriting will be smaller than when you just start something from scratch. Probably we're already thinking about that, but I just wanted to mention that because it's a good thing to bear in mind. Is that useful?
We went into the places yesterday, and you can see these in the agenda right below our meeting, where currently we have the single file editor. And these are only 3 places. And the only thing we really have there is a text field. There's like the header and everything around it is already separated away from the ACE editor. It's our custom code. So that was kind of our first finding, that right now, if we would move to any other place or any other like editor, it would basically just require to switch out the editor field. There's nothing around it right now that's depending on ACE.
At least from a visual perspective that we could tell, like how those commit and save buttons and like how they talk to ACE beyond probably, at least in my understanding. But at least visually, like it's, and that's what kind of where we stopped yesterday, was like visually it's the editor piece. It's the line numbers and the places you can type code. That's all that's used from the ACE editor everywhere.
And even these pieces currently don't take, for example, the code or the syntax highlighting theme into account. So that the single file editor already does not use, like, if you have a dark syntax highlighting theme, it's still black on white, different to what we have in the file view.
And I think that's the same thing for the web IDE as well. So we don't
Correct.
follow that. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And are you starting to think about having some sort of Chrome around the editor, or for now we're just thinking about like the input, the text area, and that would be like our UI for a single file editor?
We tried yesterday to separate it a bit and to see right now if we just wanted to replace ACE editor, and if the challenge is just getting rid of ACE, what would that contain? And that would really just be the text field. Whereas figuring out one code experience for everything might be a bigger challenge that we also have to involve other stages in way more than in this first MVC.
Okay. But that scenario of us eventually needing a scenario where we go from single file to multiple file, then that is still on the table. We just have to figure out what would be the action, what would be the UI that would trigger that change to like open a new tab or something. That would only be available in certain environments or certain conditions. Like in the case that when we have multiple files for snippets, then we'll probably enable that option, not for the rest of the cases, right?
You're talking about like if we end up supporting a use case of like if you enter into a single file edit mode and then like somehow you could expand and get the tree view back and like tab out and do whatever, right? Yeah, we're not even I'm even thinking about it yet. I think like the goal is like,
yeah,
let's get Monaco in place of editor in these smaller use cases, and then I think see how that goes and then work on the rest.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a relevant point, because even though we're not addressing it right now, it might affect the way we structure the code. Like the tabs component with something that would be prepared to be enabled in the single file editor when we move, and even like the inner workings, because they're going to have to be some backstage infrastructure to export the content of the editor to the outside layer, to the embedder, so to speak. You can prepare all of that to be, instead of a file, it could be already a list of files that only has one element for now. Does that make sense? Mostly to the front end, Dennis and Paul? Yeah. Because there will be eventually some API that will export to the whoever embedded, to export the content that's edited. I would like to have that API well defined, and instead of just starting off with just the content, we'd be like a list of contents, and then a list of stuff. Any other thoughts?
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about this, and given we had a recent issue about, hey, we could expand like our commit message for the web IDE to potentially support like fix-up commits. Whether I'm editing just a single file or multi-files, that commit step is always there. All of it to say, it'd be really nice if we had just one editor, because that step, if we have to end up duplicating it, like there's some overhead there. Even though the process of editing just a single file or multiple files is very different, the commit step is duplicated. So I really like what Andre was saying. Like if there's a way to make a distraction-free multi-edit where it looks like it's single file, but really easy to jump back doing multiple stuff if I need to, and it's the same pipeline, so that final commit step is the same. Like there's a really nice win there. If we could have really just one editor with like different modes. I'm totally jumping ahead into engineering and planning this, but yeah, I think that would also affect maybe a little bit of design as well.
I had a question on how you all selected to do snippets first. It looks like it's medium. The CI length is minimum. Can you explain why you all decided not to do the CI length implementation first?
I think we've decided to do anything. Those were like my versions of how many other things were going on the page. It was like, in terms of like what else exists in those screens, like there's lots of things on like the single file edit blob view. So I called it like the large implementation because there are more components there. So like the snippets one has like fewer components, and then the CI lint one has even fewer components. So I just gave them kind of sizes. I could have just called them small, medium, and large, and like dropped the word implementation. It has nothing to do with engineering effort. It was purely like a way for me to think about sizing.
Okay.
But also snippets, I think we'll do first because we actually own snippets and we don't own pipelines. So we'd have to talk with CI to do some work. Like it would require a little bit more collaboration. And the differences between the two is purely that CI linting, well, I would argue that the CI linting thing, one is this very hidden and probably broken experience today. And like the CI team needs to go back and think about that a little bit more. And snippets, like I think we know what we need to achieve and have and support that. The CI linting one, like you can go into your pipelines view, click a button that says CI lint, and then it just loads a blank editor that you could paste any arbitrary GitLab CI YAML file in and lint it. Even if your project like already has a GitLab CI YAML file, like it doesn't pre-populate with anything in there and like let you kind of edit and test it. It's just this like weird validation thing that sits on the side of pipeline. So I don't know what it's used for, so I don't want to mess with it yet.
But you just opened up a very big possibility right there, because there are going to be scenarios where we're going to need custom operations done on the content, depending on the context that it's used. If we already think in ways that we can enable that for people to develop that into that single file editor, if we prepare the path for them to do that integrated into the Web IDE core, we would benefit from that on the original multi-file editor, full-blown Web IDE. And I'm thinking, if we sort out a way to do linting, we can provide a way for anyone to write their own linters And by adding support to the Web IDE, they'll be adding support to the single file editor. And that's a great benefit to have people come into our domain, increase the Web IDE features so that they can get that feature on the single file editor when they want to do the CI/CD linter, for example. But this is just for us to bear in mind that we don't want the same situation that happened with the merge request widget, where it's a place that we know a lot of people want to play with, and we didn't do a lot of preparation work so to tell them guidelines or what they can and should do. So we should think about that from the get-go. And I'm thinking linters was just the example that Kai was mentioning that I think is definitely probably applicable to more places. But we should bear that in mind that probably other people will want to play in that interface. Well, what will that look like? Is it a sidebar that we can pop out and just like goes over the text as a report? What does that look like? Something for Marcel to think about.
Yep, we'll have a look at it.
I write down on the agenda at that point.
Okay. I think that gives us some ideas, and then Marcel, we can talk a little bit more about kind of helping to scope this.
Yep.
And I think just to clarify, kind of like, I don't know that we'll come away with designs because I don't think there's like a lot to design here. What we might come back with is like, here's some information about places that it's currently used, similar to like what's below, but maybe we'll get some more details here. Here's some places that it's used and like functionality that exists. And that may mean we need to do like, have a better technical understanding of like how different or similar these things are, right? Like, you know, Paul mentioned like the commit branch MR functionality, right? Like if that just was the same in all of those places, whereas like the single file editor today has this like multi-line text box that you can write commit messages in, and the branch is just like a free text box. Like there's no way to start a merge request from the single file editor, right? Like if we want that experience to be the same, then like we'd have to think about, I guess, how we want that to flow, how we could use like the same stuff we've got in the Web IDE, because let's say that's our best working example of like how we want that to work. And then how do we reuse that, or what that could look like? So, okay. Yeah, I don't think it might just be like a series of recommendations and thoughts versus like
Okay.
designs.
The specific designs we can work out in the issues once we pick them up, and we can ask Marcel for clarifications at each particular step. The other thing I would raise at this point is that for us all to be aware that there's two big efforts in this scope. One is making the Web IDE embeddable, and the other is enabling the single file editor. So there are two significant efforts. The embeddable might only allow the single file editor to be enabled, which we don't know. But the embeddable part is something that is not out of the box. We have to figure out how that would look like.
And when you say embeddable, you're saying because currently the Web IDE exists in like its own path namespace, it's not like a appended /edit to the end of like where you are in the blob view, right?
Yeah, basically it's like a full page app right now. And if you want to make it available in a snippets environment, then we're going to have to embed the code of the Web IDE to run there, probably with the single file editor enabled. But maybe that's a requirement. Like if you embed it, it has to be in the single file mode, or probably the single file mode only makes sense when it's embeddable. But still, the work to support that embeddability has to be done, including as part of this effort. It is important to understand the requirements of where they will be used and how should we enable that. So the discovery is the first step anyways, but when we start writing code for it, we're going to have two big efforts, embeddability and single file editor. That is
I'm wondering whether one depends on another, like whether these two are parallel efforts or not, like whether any of them should be prioritized, or is just like based on some technical availability or something like this. I would say that embedding the editor is sort of could be considered a bit higher priority, because Once the editor is embeddable, we can embed it in different parts of the application of the product, even though I'm not supporting single file editing yet. That however, I'm not sure whether it will be useful at that point if we don't provide the single file editing. Is there any idea what is sort of higher priority in this?
I think you're right. Just from my point, it's just like embeddability would always be the first step that we would take. Then we build a single file into it. Whether we make that available or we announce it as a feature to be able to embed the web ID is still to be seen, because we have to see the shape of it. Paul?
I think I'm excited about making it embeddable for another reason too, because when you embed something, you have to have a clear input-output for it. Right now, our web ID doesn't necessarily have that, and there's some technical debt there, and that's where our bugs come from. So to make it embeddable also implies that there's a good design here, which means that we'll have less bugs. So I'm excited about prioritizing this also for the refactoring effort of just making things a little cleaner on the inside.
I agree. And that basically includes that when it's embeddable, we'll probably disable a couple of features on the web ID, like commits. Now you're embeddable. You're not, but we have to figure out what's part of the feature set of the embedded version, and the other, what's the feature set of the single file, because they might differ.
And I think jumping ahead to engineering, I think the engineering step of it, I can see having one component with different modes being helpful. And maybe this is because I like using Vim. So that's where I'm coming from. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I understand what we need to come out with. I think we'll have to think about this a little bit more, Marcel.
Yep.
I hadn't thought about an embeddable version of, and I just want to be clear, what you're saying is you want to see an embeddable version of the entire web IDE as it exists today. Is that what you're, or is it an embeddable version?
As a feature set, I'm not really longing for that as a feature, because if I want to have the full-blown web IDE where I pick the project, where I multi-commit, whatever, I just use the full-blown. So I don't see a lot of use cases for the embeddable multi-file. But if we're sharing code base with the big multi-file editor and the single file editor on the embedded version that's going to go into snippets, then it has to be embeddable. Now, whether we'll be enabling the multi-file flow of things for people to embed anywhere, that's to be seen. But I can potentially see, if we want to make this available for open source projects, they could just make their own website and have the web IDE set to their project on gitlab.com, and they would open in their domain the web IDE. That for that particular case, it might be an iframe, to be honest. But yeah, so those are use cases that we might figure out along the way. What I'm raising is that for us to be able to put the web IDE single file in the snippets page, it needs to be reworked into an embeddable shape. Now, that doesn't need to be a feature per se, embed the multi-file editor, but the single file editor, apart from being a reduced version, needs to be embeddable. That's what I'm saying. Is that clearer?
I just wanted to have one point from purely from the developer's point of view, if we are getting into the fields of embedding, allowing, for example, in the future, I just don't see why we should not aim for that. But let's assume that web IDE is embeddable anywhere as an open source project, right? So for anybody to use this to connect to a project hosted on GitLab. There's just one thing that certainly has to be in the web IDE is the preview. Otherwise, embedding just to edit the code probably wouldn't be any exciting or any interesting. But this is just like the developer's point of view, and apparently this might not be even needed for GitLab as product.
Okay.
I know I don't make it any easier.
No, I get it. So the once we have the web IDE, we'll have at least the client-side preview, client-side projects preview that we already have. So that will come down the wire. But we have to figure out exactly what are the features that we're going to announce to the users, because that the embeddability might just a step towards single file editor, or it might be an actual feature that we promote. I'm not clear on whether this is a feature, but it is a requirement to get the single file editor as far as I understand it. Kai, is that clear for you?
I mean, it's, I think, clear for me in the sense that, like, I understand vaguely, I guess is the best way to phrase it, like what you want to do first. And it sounds like, so there's something we need to do before we say, let's go put a single file editor in the snippet. What that something is, I think, is still unclear. Like, what do we need to do scope-wise there? And so, like, I think we'll need to have some more conversations on, like, figuring out, like, what is it? What are we actually trying to make embeddable? Because, like, the use case of, like, embedding the current existing full web IDE is, like, my 30-second hot take is, like, I'm struggling to figure out, like, what the use case is and, like, why we would, and, like, and it also is, like, that feels like a lot of work. Whereas, like, just taking the, like, the little code pane in one of those and, like, putting it in snippets feels like not a lot of work, but there's clearly, like, an engineering difference of, like,
okay, so but that's a great question. I can build upon that and try to come up with a better answer. So if you think about the web IDE as a whole, as an animal, right? We can have that animal be given different skills, and then we tell them, all right, now jump on a chair, jump on a bed, run, whatever, like having skills. And that would be one entity that would do multiple things, right? And if we have that one entity be the one that feeds the large web IDE that we use today and the small web IDE that is just like a contrived, reduced version of that animal, but it's the same animal, that needs to happen. There's an alternative path, which is to have that animal be split up into two, where we create a smaller version of that animal that feeds off the same core of that animal, like the same libraries, but it's a separate entity. It's a separate object, right? That will probably bypass the embeddability, but the inner workings will have to be much more complex so that we can have, because the benefit here, we want to be able to benefit from the features we develop on the web IDE. We want to be benefiting from them on a single file editor on snippets. That was the big idea that we had in the beginning, to whether we do syntax highlighting for supporting another language, then we'll be benefiting from both scenarios on snippets and also everywhere it's used. What I'm thinking here is we either grab one animal and we make it having different superpowers where it can adapt to where it is, or we have to split up and create this family of smaller animals that then we're going to have to feed and maintain, which is harder to maintain. So our idea is to have one piece, one entity that is adaptable, that has modes, like Paul was saying. And for that to happen, we'll have to have the same code base be able to run on a full-blown web IDE, multi-file, as we know today. We turn on a flag, and it just like whoop, turns smaller, but it's the same code that runs on that embedded version. Does that make sense?
It does. I think. Sorry, go ahead, Dora.
It sounds to me like just a big block of code that you're reusing, and you send in different parameters, and based on the parameters you send in, it modifies certain behaviors or adds behaviors or removes behaviors.
That's the idea, yeah.
So you're using the word embeddability, but it's similar to what you're saying, Kai. It's a block of code that instead of writing that block of code twice and changing in one other place, just reusing the same block of code.
Yeah, I guess my question is like, building the large block of code that then you could like take things away from the faster path than building the small block of code and adding back into it and eventually replacing the web IDE in whole with this like new, more modular version. Right, like it's two ways to get to the same outcome. I think is like we either like start small with like we go do the single file editor, which is like just a text editor. We don't worry about the commit merge, blah blah blah. We don't worry about exploit, like all these other things. We say like we want a simple text editor, code editor, and then like the next use case of the single file editor is like, oh, we need to add commit merge, blah blah blah. Right, like, and then we go and we find that thing in the web IDE and we add it back into our more modular version of the code base, and like we keep going. And like, I guess until we get to a point where there is like one of these that is like individual pieces, we've got like maintenance and we've got double duty maintenance, things might break, it's more overhead, but we build to the big thing versus like building the big thing and then trying to like take things away to use in other places. Like, I don't know which one of those is more fun or faster or worse or whatever, but
the
like
thing
it feels
is
like
that we already have the big thing, right? So you have to also account for our input data. We already have the big thing, so it's only natural for us to start here and go downwards. If you would now consider building really new thing, then of course your approach going from the small thing and like extend it with some features makes total sense. However, we have to account for something that we already have now and all the expertise put into the web IDE that we have now. And I think in this case, going downwards will be faster and more efficient than building something from all the way down to the top. That's my personal opinion from the engineer point of view.
To circle this conversation back to the UX design effort element of this, because I think there's a lot of really interesting engineering ways we can go about this, but the way this all affects UX is that it would be great if the different modes that we're seeing with the single file view and the multi-file view, if they didn't differ significantly. So yeah, we're talking about stripping away features and being able to configure this, whether we end up having two components or one big component. But if we have it, well, if we're in single file mode and the way I edit and all of this is very different than our long-term vision for web IDE, that's going to make things more difficult from the engineering side where, hey, we can see a lot of benefit towards having just one big component. Kind of going back to something I mentioned earlier too, when we talk about what can we do from the single file view, reusability is going to be huge if having this consistent editing experience between single file and multi-file. However we end up doing that in engineering, that's another conversation. But yeah, when we talk about UX design, engineering is really interested in having just one component that we can configure this way, not necessarily having two different components for this, I think.
It sounds like engineering, well, we want to modularize the component we have. And what's the effort to do that?
Yeah, and I think there's different approaches we could do it, and that's what we don't necessarily. I think it makes sense having an offline, well, it's online, an async conversation about this, because yeah, we could take what we currently have, modularize it, make it reusable, or what I think Kai was saying is let's start from scratch, pull things, and make this reusable thing brand new, and then like backport it to web IDE. I think these are both good approaches. I think it's going to take some more thought and discussion on how to do this from the engineering perspective. Right now, we're just talking about the UX design. I think the thing to stress here is just the consistency between all editing of GitLab would be great, because then we can do it in just very nicely in just one component where we're just stripping off features, not like completely changing a feature. No pressure on you, Marcel.
No, I think that helps a lot.
And I actually, I threw together something really quickly. It's not the general idea, but I would love to hear whether this is like the direction you want to hear from me. So I threw together a quick example. So this is our current snippet view. This is what we currently have in the web IDE. And I just stripped out this editor window put something like tiny, add another file as tab in here, and then pushed it into the snippet view. Is this kind of what we are talking about? This is kind of what you need to see? Good.
Yeah, this kind of thing is
Very much so.
Yes. Yeah.
Good.
You should have started with this, Marcel.
But
I didn't have this when this all started. Like this was done in like 2 minutes.
But the create snippet button is really like the commit button, right? And so would you rather, is this where like we get into like you want to see
Input, output.
And I think when we talk about engineering, like the output of the web IDE isn't necessarily the visual part of it too. The output is also this API that comes with it. Like we're going to commit these changes for something. So UX, do whatever makes sense. But yeah, just making sure there's not some stark differences between the two is, I think, most important. Yeah, and I don't mean to commandeer the rest of the conversation, but Andre and I have our one-on-one, and if we don't have it, I'm gonna freak out. So I'm just kidding.
No, I appreciate it. It's I think that helped a lot for where Marcel and I kind of got stuck, and I understand more what you're looking for. So I think that gives us a place to go and think about this differently than we were thinking about it, which is good. And then come back with kind of like, here's how we envision we would use this kind of all over the place. And then like understanding like all of the pieces you're looking for consistency makes more sense too. So like, I think we've got a good idea on that.
Good. Thanks.
So Kai, I'm curious, you and Marcel are having these discussions. Are they being documented in like an issue somewhere? We could put these nice designs up so that we can see that.
Well, so our discussion yesterday is right below. So we took notes and recorded that one so we could talk about that. We didn't cut, there's nothing, we didn't really come away with anything, but we will make sure that like the design discovery issue gets updated with whatever we come away with.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. It looks like the next two are covered or sort of read-only-ish. I don't know.
Anything you want to add urgently, Paul, so that everybody's aware?
I'd like to have a source graph conversation sometime soon because there's some open issues about this, and I want to make sure that we are intentional about the state of it with the release posts and other things going on. So if we could have one today, but let's talk about it on Slack. I'm about to just ping you guys on it right now. So that'd be good. Cool.
All right.
Well, real quick, guys. Kai, did you want to tell everyone about your schedule for next week in case they need you?
I'm off. I'll have no internet. Good luck.
Good luck to you.
Yeah.
Gee, man. I hope you survive.
Yeah.
So who do we ping instead?
No one. James is off too, so no one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one. Get your questions in before the end of the week, and then we'll figure it out.